Welcome to the Founders Odyssey podcast, where we create an environment for founders to thrive through education, inspiration, and a supportive community. My name is Nathan Bird, and I will be your host today. Our special guest today has an enduring story of adversity and triumph. From being broke to feeling like he was trapped in his corporate job to building a multiple seven-figure software development company, David Mansilla knows what the Founders Odyssey is. With his thriving business now set, he is branching out to impact and guide the next generation to have balance in life through his new podcast and books. Join us today as we dive into the life and story of entrepreneur, investor, and amazing human, David Mansilla. David, thank you for joining us today on the show.
It's a pleasure to be here. No, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Hey, man, I love the background. Let's just talk about that for a second. I know many people out there can't see this. They're listening on audio, but David's got an amazing aurora borealis lights going back and forth. What about that?
Well, I love nature.
Yeah.
And so I'm always trying to surround myself by trees and blue skies. And I love watching the stars at night in a clear night. And when I saw this background, I'm like, oh, this is great. Plus, if you go and see, I've never seen the aurora borealis live. It's one of the things on my bucket list. But if you see this effect on how the protection of our planet is so incredible that even when you get too much of a good thing, it could be bad. And then you go there and you realize that we have a beautiful protective electromagnetic field that makes sure that we only get enough sunlight so that we don't burn.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I really enjoy that. And one thing I grabbed out of that is life. And you are a life giver to many people. And there's life here on this earth that we want to, take care of and be responsible for, just like the people that you're responsible for in your life and the things that you're thankful for. So that's one thing that I grasped from you just out of that quick interaction, as well as what you do in life and now where you're trying to focus. So thanks for sharing that. One thing I wanted to do is ask you, what is entrepreneurship to you? What does it mean?
For me, it's a way to reach freedom. It's a way to live life on your own terms. If you have that vocation, if you actually are called to that path in life, because it's not the simple way. In fact, the simple way is to get a job and be happy and grow in a corporation. And I did that. And honestly, it's fulfilling and simple. And it's complicated still within the corporate environment. But when you realize that you want to choose your own path, you don't want others to determine your own path, that creates a sense of freedom. And that was good enough for me to find my own path through my own enterprises.
It takes a special someone to have that attitude, and it also takes environments that push that individual to a brink of making change, or it pushes you, as an entrepreneur, you just want more, you want better. So talk to me about the early stages in life and how you wanted more.
Yeah, so I came from Guatemala back in 1991. The country was at war for over 30 years already when I brought over. My brother died in that war. I didn't move because of the war. I moved because of a job opportunity that I had with my brother. He had a business already in Canada, and I'm a computer scientist, so he needed to have a software built. This is 1991, so you didn't have many developers back then. So I knew how to write code, and so to make the long story short, I came over, wrote an invoicing system for him in 1991. To give you an idea how the technology was, he needed to have a hard drive in his computer, and the hard drive was $10,000, and it was a 10 megabyte hard drive. $10,000 for 10 megabytes.
That's incredible. We have terabytes now.
Yeah, I mean, my phone has 512 gigabytes, right?
That's
and I paid $1,000 for
those. Hey, for those out there listening, do the quick math for us as far as megabytes to gigabytes to terabytes.
So it goes in 1024, right? So 1 gigabyte is 1,024 megabytes.
Yeah, exactly.
We got 10 megabytes. right? 1 gigabyte is 1,024 megabytes. My phone has 512 gigabytes, so it has half a terabyte.
Yeah.
So if you do the math compared to the pricing in 1991, this phone was probably worth $500,000 back then. If it existed.
That's so interesting how technology has evolved, right? So you had a job opportunity. So you shot over to Canada. Let's back it up just a little bit. I want to understand, a little bit more of David as a younger kid and then high school, and then really what sparked your desire to, like I said, you had an opportunity to move out, but what was it like as you were younger?
Yeah, I always was a rebel. I was always going against the rules that didn't make sense. So if a rule makes sense in my life, even as a kid, I will follow it. But if a rule didn't make sense, I wouldn't do it. And that got me into a lot of trouble early in life. Yeah.
So where did this vocational tenacity begin as far as understanding your competencies in, software or the direction of being a programmer?
Yeah, to be honest with you, a lot of what you are is the influences from your family when you're being brought up. So I actually went to military school for 2 years because I wanted to become a jet pilot, a fighter pilot. So I was pursuing that career, and my dad supported me on that. The problem is that by the end of the second year, they closed down the Air Academy because there were too many pilots and not enough planes. So they needed more people, in infantry, in artillery. They needed more people on the ground, and I wasn't interested in that. I was just going to military school to get my pilot's license, basically. So something happened back then in the 80s. If you wanted to graduate, you needed to have a typewriting exam, and you needed to write it. You needed to use the typewriter with enough speed so you could pass the exam. And if you made one mistake, you will have to start the whole thing from scratch. So one mistake was instant failure. So I spent 4 months trying, and I'm like, this is ridiculous. There's gotta be a better way to do this. And it happened that my uncle was the CTO for the biggest bank in the country. So on a birthday party, I was explaining to him my frustration on typewriting, and he said, "You know what? Come to my office next week. I'll show you something." So here I go to the data center of this big bank, and he showed me my first text editor, and he said, "See, I make a mistake. I just push the key, hit delete, replace the key, push print, boom, up it comes." I'm like, so he did in 5 minutes what it took me 4 hours to make. And I'm like, I want to know more about this, right? And at the same time, my dad bought an Apple IIe computer. That computer went into the space shuttle. That's how old it was. But he locked it. And he says, "You're not allowed to touch this computer. It's only for me and super expensive." But he made sure that I saw where he hid the key. So, of course, he will go to work, and I will actually go get the key and use the computer. And I became a master in the computer behind his back, but it wasn't behind his back. When I got older, he told me, "I did that on purpose because if I gave it to you, you wouldn't be interested. But because I had it as something that you were not allowed to do, I knew you were going to get attracted to it."
Well, that's so funny.
So when I saw that my career as a pilot was over, at least for a moment, I thought I want to become a computer scientist. So my dad talked to my uncle, and they got me into the best computer science school in the country. That's how it started.
Wow, that's such a blessing, You're such a tinkerer, and that rebel side of you came out where you're like, you know what? You say I'm not going to do it, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do it good.
Exactly. Reverse psychology. My dad was brilliant.
And then you also took not a shortcut, you just found a better way. And that's what a lot of people do in entrepreneurship. They just find a better way. Mm-hmm. And so, okay, now we can speed over to through high school. You obviously have this bug. You're tinkering with the computers. You're understanding the behind the scenes, and you're really having a knack for development. So now you're over in Canada. What's next?
Well, I landed here, and to begin with, I wasn't in Toronto. I was in a little town called Waterloo. which is it's about 75 miles away from Toronto. But this is 1991. So we went right from the airport into Waterloo. We didn't go into the city. Like the Pearson Airport is about 25 kilometers away from downtown Toronto. And back then it wasn't as developed as it is now. So it was a 2-lane highway to go from the airport to my brother's house. And then he says, let's go downtown. Now I'm expecting all these high-rise buildings and stuff because a week before, since I was traveling to Canada, I went to see my sister. She lived in New York City. So I'm like, oh my God, this is awesome, right? All the high-rise buildings and stuff. So I thought that Canada was like that. So I go to Waterloo and it was 50,000 people, 2 banks. So he's like, I'm going to show you downtown. And I go around and it's like, in 2 minutes, we went through downtown. And he says, did you like downtown? I'm like, what? What downtown? I didn't see anything.
It was supposed to be better than this.
Plus it was snowing because I came in November 18th. That's when I landed. And it was snowing already. I'm like, oh my God, it's so cold and it's so different. It was dead, you know.
That's good. That's a good memory, though.
It was interesting. Also, like my brother was probably one of 10 immigrant families in the town. It was a German town.
Yeah.
So very
That's
interesting.
Good. So you hit the ground running and you got to work.
Yep.
Share with us a little bit about how that experience was, and then, you know, really what got you to the point where you wanted to leave that environment.
Yeah, so it took me about a year and a half to finish his program. We made great progress, and I talked to my wife, and I came with her and my kid, and we just saw so much peace, especially in a little town, right? Everybody was helpful, peaceful. We got open arms reception. Canadians are exceptional for that. I remember my first Thanksgiving. You know, we had our apartment and everything else, and we opened the door. Somebody knocked on the door, and it was this delivery guy with a turkey and full of food and pots and pans, and you know, I wasn't in need, but somebody knew that I was a new immigrant, and from church they came and they brought this beautiful gift to us, and to the point, I still don't know who did it. It was anonymous.
That's amazing.
You know, so my wife said, you know, this is going to be a beautiful place to raise our kids. So we made the decision to stay.
So you were working, and then there were, you know, of course, like you said, about a year and a half went past. Where and when did that idea for your own company begin, and what action steps did you take in order to make it a reality?
Yeah, I always wanted to be my own. Like when my brother found out that I knew how to write programs, I was already independent in Guatemala. I wrote an accounting software for payroll for a 300 people factory back home. And I did it as a freelancer with another friend of mine. So my idea was always to use computer science as a business. Problem is in Canada, like, you know, nobody would validate even my schooling. Like I came with a computer science degree. My wife too, I met her in computer science school. So I had to do it all over again. So I signed up for school again, and I became a student again for another 4 years of training. And the whole goal was to open my own business. So that happened. I graduated, and the internet was beginning to take off. This is 1995. And the Canadian government had a program for computer science graduates, where if you wanted to own your own business, they would pay for an MBA, customized MBA for computer grad scientists. And they will, if you pass that 1 year intensive course, they will give you a loan. So it was a loan from a bank backed by the government to start your own business. So that's how it started. I went through that program. I excelled at it, and then I got the equivalent of about, I think, $40,000-$50,000 of today's time money back then in 1996.
That's a great amount for starting a business.
So end of that,
software industry either.
Yeah. So I started, got the money, and I spent it foolishly because I had no idea what I was doing. Right.
Let's talk a little bit about that, because that's every founder's Odyssey, right? Every founder's journey where they make mistakes. And yeah, so I want to talk to you a little bit about that.
So I was 20, I think I was 25 years old back then. I had the money in the bank as a loan. It was interest-free and no payment for a year to get you going, right? And then I'm like, okay, I'm a computer scientist. I had the experience from my brother kept hiring me to grow because his business grew. Like he had a retail chain. So he started with one store when I came, and he had 8 stores by the time that I graduated. So I kept working part-time on his business, growing the software. So I thought, oh, I got experience. Now I got the degree. I'm going to become a computer consultant. Nobody will trust me with their systems. They still saw me as a junior developer, right? So when the money started to run out, I thought I had to do something. So the only gig that I had was my brother's, but that wasn't paying the bills because the software was mostly finished. So I said, okay, I had this lease. I'm not bringing any money. I got to do something. So a buddy of mine told me, how about you build computers? Back in the late 90s, there was this craze of clones where people, instead of buying brand names, you will assemble a computer and you will sell it. So I started doing that, and it started to go really well. It was my first marketing gig because I thought I need to put an ad in the paper for people to know that I'm selling computers. But most my competition had like half-page ads, full-page ads. I couldn't afford that, so all I did was a tiny, ad with a small sentence with the price, and the price was about 20% off everybody else's. Nice. Before I knew, I was selling hundreds of computers a week. So I had an assembly line, and it was great. Like I remember the first 7 months, it was incredible. I was hiring students to help me build the computers and operating systems and all that. And the problem was the warranty, because I was using Chinese parts that were not the best in order to lower the price, and my profit margin was 5%. So I was still making money on volume, but after people started claiming warranties, because it was 1 year warranty, I will service the warranty, and that will remove that 5% gain plus a loss on each computer. So when I did the math, I was already in debt, not only the money that the government gave me, but I also had $10,000 on credit card debt. And my wife was supporting the family. I had 2 little kids back then, and she was making ends meet just to pay the rent and bring food, because I was $0, right? I was losing money every month. So I'm like, I didn't know what to do. And somebody told me, declare bankruptcy and go get a job, right? When I was contemplating on that, it was a horrible time in my life. When I was contemplating that, turns out that one of my co-op students, he was in love with the business, and he brought his dad one night out of the blue. And the dad says, we want to buy your business. Because by then I had over 1,000 clients in my Rolodex. And the name was already recognized in the city. So he said, how much do you want for your business? And he came with a checkbook. And I'm like, I was so amazed. The number that I had was the money that I owed, right? I just wanted to get out of debt. So I tell him, how about this? And he's like, are you sure? He asked me 3 times, this is how much you want? I'm like, yeah. He wrote the check, and he said, sign here. And he bought the business from me. Little did I know that the market value and the brand value of the company was 3 times as much as what I sold it for.
Yes.
But I didn't know anything about business. And it was a blessing, because I cleared all my credit card debt. I paid back the government, and I had enough money I had about 4 months of runway money to get a job.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, you've got to go through those times, and gosh, that would have been something that took so much weight off your chest.
Oh, brother, it was blessed. It was, especially when I got my job. By the way, back then, it wasn't as easy as now for a developer to get a job. But since I had the 2-year experience in my own business, they took it as experience. But still, I remember I had to send 300 resumes. Out of the 300 resumes, I got 5 job interviews. Another marketing lesson, right? That was the pipeline. 300 resumes, 5 job interviews. I got offered 1 job, right? And when I got hired, my hiring manager told me, we had 100 applicants for this job, and you were the best. I'm like, oh my God, thank God.
Okay, so you've had your experience a little bit with running a business, having to hire, or at least, incentivize people to come aboard and to build something. Tell me a little bit about that, and then we'll transition into, what's present, and how was that process of the scaling of that business? What were some challenges that you met, but also how did you incentivize new people to come aboard?
Yeah, so it was super simple. Like, for the first business, every kid in town wanted to learn how to build a computer. So actually, most of my people were not paid. I didn't have any money to pay them. They were like interns, summer interns, basically. And
Okay.
the kid that bought the business out of me, he had friends, and before I knew, I had a shop full of people building computers, and then we would play video games at night. Because I remember building the first token ring network, and this first text-based game came out that will have a graphical interface. It was called Dune. I think it still exists, but I played the first version of that. So we had 8 computers in the office, and we're just play computers until midnight.
Okay,
that's how
so
I pay them. By playing games.
We're all learning some business tips here from David about how to incentivize people. So have some really good food, have some video games available, maybe a few bean bags if you're listening out there.
And this was in the 90s. I didn't have no idea what I was doing. I just said, guys, I cannot pay you, but I have this awesome hardware, and I built the network, and my nephew told me about the game. I'm like, oh, this is fucking awesome. Yeah. The thing though is that I never got into games. That was the only time in my life that I play games. Okay.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, so you built that and you sold it, which was that's awesome, man. You quote unquote exit a business. So then you went, so you got a job. Tell us a little bit about that. Then we'll move forward into the present.
Yeah, so I got a job, but my journey for being an entrepreneur was still in my heart. I was still servicing my brother's software. My brother kept growing, and something that I did was very smart. I didn't sell my company name. I told the guy, I will give you everything except the company name. I want to keep that. It was called Canada Digital Systems, and it was in my heart. So I kept that, and I printed little pamphlets, and I put it all in all the stores, my brother's stores, talking about the point of sale system, because back then the people that had point of sale systems was Toys R Us and Sears and the big brands. Small shops couldn't afford that. I made it possible for my brother. So he had the little computer screen and automated invoicing. So I just left it there, went to get a full-time job. 4 months into my full-time job, somebody calls me. And he says, I picked up your information from this store, and I'm about to open a 10,000 square foot retail store for hobbies and crafts, and I love your software. I talked to somebody and they showed me what you had, and I want you to build one for me. And I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. That was my dream, right? But my wife, it was so hard for her to support me back then. And I'm like, you know what? And we were pregnant with our 3rd kid. So I said, you know what? I cannot resign to my job right now. I just cannot afford it. So I went to talk to my boss, and I was hired as a developer for the Board of Education. So I was doing education software and administration software. So this has nothing to do with that. So I told my boss, do you mind if I do this at night? And then they had to change my contract, and they allowed me to have this 1 gig at night. To make the long story short, that gig paid me twice as much as I was making in my full-time job, and it lasted 8 years.
Wow. So did you never quit your full-time job?
Actually, I kept upgrading jobs. So at the second, so I stayed at the Board of Education for 2 years, and the director of software left to work for the biggest telecommunications company in Canada, and he knew how good I was. Or he thought I was good anyway. So he actually hired me out to the new business, and he doubled my salary. Problem was that I had to drive to Toronto every day. It was about an hour and a half commute, but the salary was so much. I told him, you have to make it big enough for me to do this, because it's crazy. Plus, I still had the gig part-time. So I remember he said, tell me how much you want to make. So I said, just for fun, I doubled the salary. And he says, okay, plus here, an allowance for gas.
So we've got a few lessons here. You're saying that, you get what you ask for, number one, but also having proper communication with your superiors or with your partners, if you want to look at it. And that's what it seems like you had. You went to your boss or whatever, and you just said, hey, listen, I've got an opportunity. I don't want to do anything behind your back. And this is what I'd like to really pursue. And I think a lot of people will hold that back possibly and not really have open lines of communication. I mean, not everybody, but I'm just saying that that's a good lesson to learn here.
Yeah, actually, it's based on gratitude. That job, my first job, I was so thankful that I got that job because it got me out of huge financial stress that I felt like I owed everything to that job. And I was doing a lot more than they were asking me to. In fact, I got in trouble with the rest of the developers because I was doing twice as much work as they were doing. So I was making them look bad. But I'm like, I'm going to do whatever it takes to pay them back this amazing job that I have, right? Mm-hmm. And that's why the director, he wasn't my boss. He was like the top guy, right? I was just a junior coder. And he noticed that. And that's why he offered me the job in the big business. So that's another huge lesson. If you have gratitude also, I will not do anything behind their back and risk my job and my reputation. Why would I do that? I told my wife, we have enough. It wasn't like a lot because my wife stopped working because we had the third kid. But I'm like, if they say no, it's okay. And they say yes. So, and when I got the other job back, my director told me, by the way, if you still have time, you can still keep your part-time gig. And I kept it.
There's so many lessons there. That's good. I appreciate you sharing that. So presently, let's talk a little bit about what you're doing, what you're excited about. And, the current company, I'd be curious. I mean, we could go so many different directions because a lot of people out there want to know how to build software and build applications. And hey, I've got an idea. I bet you hear that right and left every day. I've got an idea. How do I build an app? And, I'd like to, let's touch on what you're currently excited about and where you're building.
Sure. Oh my God, it's been such a transformational life. And you asked me, gratitude, what am I thankful for at the beginning? And I said, I'm grateful for life experience, for being alive, because every day is different. And every day I wake up and I get to breathe and I'm here and I'm standing, and that's enough. That's enough to feel grateful. And I'm telling you this because of what you're asking, right? And in my business right now, I tend to crush people's hopes and dreams most of the time because people come with this great software idea and they don't know what it takes to build a software company, a software product company. But I have over 30 years experience doing this. So I entertain and I tell them and I give them options for sure. But most of the time, I told them like how much money you have to invest. And so, he's like, I have $20,000 and let's build this. And I'm like, brother, like that will cover your I can build your prototype with that. And then what? What you gonna do next? And I tell them, if you have $500,000, will be risky still, right? And I tell them my stories. I've wasted over $4 million in my lifetime building software product companies myself with my developers and side gigs and stuff, right? Great ideas. For example, Dropbox, right?
Yes.
2 years into my business, I had this idea to do distributed file sharing for backups because we had a storm and I lost a lot of data in one of our systems, and even the backup hard drive got broken. So I'm like, there's gotta be a way to actually send the data automatically through the internet. This is 2007, so the internet wasn't that fast. And I built an algorithm using Unix software built on top of Windows. And I made it work. And I started selling it as a backup. It was called DR Sentinel. And I spent a lot of money building that. And I thought, this is it. We're just going to become a backup software company. But what happened is I didn't focus enough. And I didn't know how to raise money back then. Mm-hmm. And I was in the wrong environment where I lived. We have a huge startup community now, but back then it was just beginning. If I had this idea and I was in San Francisco, I would have become the first Dropbox. But I wasn't. And I didn't know how to raise money either. And I was always afraid of raising money. So I did it all with my own effort. I spent 3 years doing little bits, spent a ton of money. And at the end of the day, the money that I was getting from consulting was 10 times more. So I just dropped it. And then 2 years later, Dropbox comes into play. I'm like, oh my God, and this guy becomes $1 billion company, right?
Let's talk about raising money, actually. I mean, there's a lot of people that raise money. There's a lot of people that bootstrap through consulting gigs, things like that. Why do you think that you had a problem with raising money?
Well, I didn't believe in it. I didn't know. I had a huge wound from the money that I borrowed on the first business. So it was a huge burden for me. I sold the business just to pay back that loan, right? And my credit card. So actually, when I started the second business, I promised myself that I will never lend a penny to build the second business. And you know how I started it? Somebody told me, well, I already had the gig part-time, which was through my own business. But when I created the first corporation, I said, even the money for the lawyers to register the company, I'm going to bill first. So I actually got a gig that was a couple of weeks. I got enough money to actually incorporate the company, and I sent them the bill after I incorporated. And that was my way of thinking. But it's wrong. It's right and it's wrong. It depends what you want to do, right? Like a lot of people, like if you look all the biggest startups in the world, they started by raising money. It's important. And now I have multiple startups that I'm part owner on where I invest my money. And I get the multiples, right? Mm-hmm. But to give you an idea, for an investor, for every 10 gigs that you invest in, it's very likely that you're going to lose 7 or 8 of them. One is going to break even, and the one is going to make you rich. Mm-hmm. And that's how an angel investor thinks. And if you're into going to angel investing, you have to be very real about that. So my suggestion is get into the community before you start spending your money, because that's the way it is. I've seen companies with $5 million investment that they go belly up in 2 years, because there is a lot of things that could go wrong. But that doesn't mean don't do it. It's just look at the play. I remember going to see this guy, this billionaire in New York City on an angel trip that I did, angel investor trip. And he gave me such a beautiful lesson. He said, David, if I don't get 30x potential in an investment in a software startup, I don't invest. And I thought it was 10x. I'm like, 30x is a lot. And I asked why. Well, it's the only way that you can gonna get your money back if you really think about it. I've been doing this for 20 years. And I almost been bankrupt 3 times because all of the investments went belly up. But then the one company made me a billionaire, right? Unfortunately, I cannot disclose what he invested in, but he invested in one of those Silicon Valley startups, and he's a billionaire now. Mm. But he saw 30x potential, right?
Yeah, 30x. So I guess it's really just about being smart about diversifying your portfolio, as you're saying. I mean, that's another topic that we could touch on, but I mean, we only have so much time here. I'd love to.
We could talk all day about this, brother.
I know we could talk all day about, multiples, companies to look at, specific investment thesis, and then intricate software development and how the future looks right now. And that's actually something I'd be really interested to ask you on the podcast now is, where are you seeing the advancements in technology and really some areas that need a little bit more TLC, I'd say, or where are the areas that are growing that you're seeing?
Yeah. I tend to focus more now, like despite that I have about 5 different businesses based on software applications. On my main core business, on ISU Core, where we'll do software consulting thing, I will build platforms for other people. I tend to focus more on strongly founded business that need to automate. But not the software being the main core as the business. For example, somebody that imports goods from China, right? How do we build software to 10x their business? They're still importing goods from China into the US, but my software is making them a lot more profitable, and everything runs on that software. So Peter Diamandis said this in one of the conferences that I was with him. He said, if a company doesn't become a software business that happens to do whatever it is that they do, they will become bankrupt within 5 to 10 years. And I truly believe that. So my whole purpose at ISU Corp is making software companies out of traditional businesses. That's what I do. And that's my passion, because when you automate something that is already working, you grow it exponentially. But when you're trying to automate something that is broken, you get something 10 times more broken.
I would agree with you on that statement. And that's something I've been really seeing in a lot of companies that I'm working with, or at least consulting with, and asking questions in regards to their effectiveness and efficiencies within their companies via their softwares. And you're spot on. How can we just increase the productivity and efficiencies within the companies that haven't yet utilized softwares, whether it can be intellectual property or a plug into a white label SaaS product that can really help the efficiencies. And then you can move on to creating your own, IP as a company. It just depends. I mean, there's phases, right, that you could help to consult. But of course, as a developer, you want to immediately, hey, listen, this is an option that we can develop for you.
Yeah, actually, we try to focus more on building a platform where the whole business runs on. And I'm not talking about ERP software or accounting software. All that's already there, but how we talk to everything to create a central piece. I'll give you an example, right? I didn't invent this. This happened just as a gig. Bob Proctor, one of our biggest clients back 10 years ago, not the motivational speaker, but another Bob Proctor from Toronto. He had a very large marketing company, but actually the market, what they did is they had about 500 people going through all the biggest supermarkets in Canada, and they would check price lists on different items. And then they would gather that data and they would produce reports for the competition. And the competition knew this was going on, and they will buy these reports from them so that if you have your eggs on sale this week, you make sure that that day nobody else had the eggs on sale, because otherwise you're competing with the same product. And what they want is attract people. So Walmart will have ketchup on sale, while Sobeys will have eggs on sale, thanks to this reporting that this company did, Bob Proctor, right? So he hired me because their software was a mess and the database wasn't working. The developers were leaving for better paying jobs, the same problems as always. So I said, this is a great opportunity to build something amazing for you. So it took us, at that time, that gig took about 8 years to build. So at the beginning, I didn't have the smarts. I just fixed what they had, and they were better collecting the data. So I wasn't innovating. I just fixed what they had. But then after that, I told, hey, Bob, like if you invest in this, you can create something so good with business intelligence and AI that you can easily 10x your business. And he said, yes, he invested. That's why it took so long. But something happened. He tried to sell his business many times throughout the 8 years, and the most he will get is 2-3x in his EBITDA. You know how much he sold it for at the end? 10x. You know why? Because the software became the core of the business. The platform was delivering so much value to their clients that they consider that as a software company that happened to do this reporting for market intelligence. And that's what I got the idea. If I could do this with this business, I could do it with any business. And it's not only on business automation. We focus a lot of creating community now. So we have a private social network now. It's a piece of software that is part of our core. And this software, what it does, it creates community. You know, when they say that your net worth is based on your network, that is 100% true. And businesses have a huge opportunity that they are missing. Mm-hmm. When you build a Facebook group, you're giving your data to Facebook. When you build a LinkedIn group, you're giving your data to LinkedIn. That's why it's free. So what I do now is I create private networks for my clients to create their community and to stay in touch with them, to grow them. And it's working great. And that's when you start multiplying your EBITDA, right?
Mm-hmm. You got me all excited. I'm sorry. I'm like, we'll have to talk offline because this is some good stuff. You've got a book coming out. I'm really excited about that. If you want to share with our audience a little bit about that, as well as this new podcast that you've launched, we want to support you in all the ways that we can. And I'd like for you to explain what that's about.
Oh, thank you so much. So the podcast came out of the necessity for people that wanted more out of the first book. So the first book I released in 2020, April 2020. It's called Breaking Out of Corporate Jail. And it's basically my life story all the way up to 2013, when I became financially independent and I could actually retire, 2013, 2014, and how I did it. And the book became #1 bestseller in Canada and the USA very quickly, and stayed there for over a month, which is kind of hard to do. Now I know it's kind of hard to do, because back then I didn't know what I was doing. I just self-published. But it got successful because a lot of people are in jobs and they feel trapped, and they know that they have something inside of them that tells them, I want to do my own thing, but they don't know how to do it and how to go for it. When I did it in 2005, when I started my second job, which is what I have now, my second business, there was no podcast. There were very, very little people will tell you what to do. So I had to go break through everything to become successful. Now I wrote this book where you have a formula that you can follow. There is 1,000 formulas that work. I just showed the one that worked for me, the one that I discovered. So people were asking for more information on how they can do it. And I told them, brother, sister, I already told you all I know. So somebody told me, why don't you interview people that have their own business and they go through their own stories, so you can give more information, more value. So it's been a couple of years in the podcast. It's been fantastic. And I interview amazing entrepreneurs and their stories. Every story is different, but you can start seeing patterns. And I love seeing patterns. As a software scientist, when you see the pattern is when you say, okay, this is what we're ought to do. That's how the river flows, right? But regardless of entrepreneurship and regardless of finding freedom in life, because you can find freedom in life in a job, for sure. I know many of my best friends are in jobs and they're as happy as they can be. So I thought freedom is found on your emotional state. At the end of the day, freedom is found on your emotional state. If you look at somebody like Nelson Mandela, he was in jail for over 20 years, but he never stopped, right? In his heart, he was free. And he used that time to become a lawyer and change his country's trajectory. And he became the president, right? So I'm like, there's gotta be something more, because I thought the only way to be free is to have your own business. And that's not true. The only way to be free is to have your mindset in a way that you're always in a beautiful state. You're always happy, regardless of what goes on around your life. And that's what this book is about, your life in abundance. I'm calling it your life in abundance with purpose, because I'm not talking just about abundance, material abundance. Most importantly, emotional abundance. I know a lot of people that are 10 times richer than I am, and they're still in jail, but it's an emotional jail. I know people that are stuck in the loop of building material wealth, and that loop is so strong that they lost their family, they lost their friends. So all they got to do is, how do I make another $10 million? And once they make the other $10 million, they get happy for 2 weeks, and they are back in the grind, because the only thing that they can feel fulfillment from is building more material wealth. That's not freedom for me. That's still being in jail. And I also know people that have nothing, that have just enough to eat, and they are the happiest people that I know. How? Like, explain to me how. How could that happen? I just came back from a trip from Guatemala, and they took me into the poorest areas. Every time I go to a third world country, I try to go to the poor areas to see how people behave. It was a holiday back there, and the highway had a big piece of grass in the middle, and somebody came with a cart, and they started selling food, and I saw hundreds of people sitting on the grass, having their meal, watching cars pass by, and they look genuinely happy. Kids playing with balls, and these people are day-to-day people. Like, if they don't work the next day, they don't eat, and they looked happy, happier than many people that I know, with all the cars in the driveway and the mansions and the trips and all that, and feeling lonely. The worst failure in life is being successful and at the same time being unfulfilled. And that's what I want to fix with this book. I also know people that are super poor and are miserable, even worse than the rich people that I know. So it's not about how much money you have. It's about learning how to generate your own happiness and your own freedom in your heart, in your brain, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Perspective.
You know what my dad used to say? I know money is not the answer for happiness, but I'd rather cry in a limousine than cry in a bicycle.
Oh, gotta love your pops.
I know.
Well, man, this has been such a blessed time, and you've got a big purpose right now, a big mission and a big heart to help people in an area or in a time that we need it most, number one, but also in a time that you've experienced certain things that you're sharing with others. You've been there, you've done that, but now it's almost time to say, reprioritize your priorities and make sure that you live a life of balance.
Life of balance. You got it right. And also, don't try to avoid Don't try to avoid problems. I mean, yeah, make sure that you create a life where there is as little problems as possible. But when a problem shows up that you had no chance to control it, embrace it. Embrace it and learn the lesson and go through the problem with a good attitude, with a beautiful mindset, because most of the suffering comes from the problems that we get. And sometimes you say, why this? Why this is happening to me? And that's when you start suffering. But if you change your mindset and you realize that the problem is the only way to get you to the next level, when you realize that problems are actually blessings in disguise, something that is for you to handle and to manage and to learn from it, then you start finding freedom.
Yeah, I always look at problems and I'll ask why, but I'll also ask how, and how is really in replacement of why, because how is more of an action, and it really puts you into a resourcefulness, and that's the mindset that you approach it. You say, if you don't say why, you say how, then it turns you into how I can get through this, and immediately switches your action. Well, man, this has been great. So share with our audience, do you have any digital assets? Like, do you have a website that we can look at? Do you have, LinkedIn? How can we get a hold of you?
Sure. Just Google my name and you will find all my links. But the main site is isucorp.ca. The book site is called davidmansilla.com. So you go to davidmansilla.com, you will find all the podcasts there. You will find the books. Everything is there.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us today on the Founders Odyssey podcast. And if you guys out there loved this podcast, feel free to subscribe. We're on Spotify as well as on YouTube. You can follow us there. So until next time, feel free to look back at all of the great episodes of the founders that we've had on here, people that have taken their company IPO, raised millions in funding, develop some innovative products. It's a wonderful lineup. So once again, David, thank you so much for coming on.
Hey, my pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.